to another episode of Music Musings. I am your host, Derek, and today I am all by myself. Pat is not with me today. We are doing a half-step mini episode. Really excited to talk about today's topic. So, Pat, we will see you on the next episode, and really excited to get into today's topic. So, today we're going to talk about why the first 10 seconds of any song is important. A lot of songs that we hear on the radio usually hook us in, get us into the song right away, and it's within those first 10 seconds that are so important to the listener if that is going to be a popular song or not. So most songs don't fail at the chorus. They fail before you even realize what the song is about. Today, with TikTok, Instagram, Reels, everything, doom scrolling, listeners today really decide fast if they're going to like something. So those first 10 seconds of the song have to captivate you, pull you in, and get you ready for the rest of that song. We live in a culture today that a lot of listeners are streaming their songs. So they have the ability to skip songs they don't like and just keep skipping. And if you listen to Spotify, we all know who DJ X is. The more you skip, the more the algorithm in the DJ AI will actually cater the songs to what you want to listen to. So you're rewarded with listening more or listening to songs longer, because then the AI figures out this person really wants to listen to this type of music, so now I'm going to build my playlist around that song. So we live in a world where skipping songs gets you to the music you really want to listen to. So the more you skip, and when you find songs you really like, the more you're rewarded. And this is very different than even when I was growing up. We didn't have streaming. So you didn't have that ability to just have some AI computer generational code thing figure out what you want to listen to. You had to go out to music stores. You had to listen to entire albums before you figured out what do you actually really like. And we'll talk about that a little bit more, a little bit later in the episode. But today's culture, it's really important that those first 10 seconds, that first impression of the song that you hear is really important now to listeners. So going back, I remember just when I was growing up, I would listen to CDs. That was my format that I listened to music mostly on growing up. And this was from, I would say, elementary school into high school. I think CDs, they had the best sound quality, and they could hold more songs than, vinyl or tape. And I can still vividly remember, walking into an FYE store at my mall and spending hours there just going through the CDs, looking for an album or an artist I really wanted to listen to, but not fully knowing if I was really going to enjoy that album, not fully knowing if I was going to like every single song, and still spending $12, $15 on an album, which back then was a lot of money. And it really wasn't until I sat down and listened to that CD, if I knew if I was going to like, that artist or that album 100%. And for me, I remember still growing up, listening to Linkin Park, Hybrid Theory, jamming out to it in my 1993 Toyota Camry. And that was such an important album for me because the first 10 seconds of the first track, which was Paper Cut, really pulled me in. The scratching of the turntables, the effects on the guitar really captivated me into not only that song, but the rest of that album. And I still listen to that album. It's a great album, time to time on Spotify. But those first 10 seconds and just the sound of the turntables, the guitar, the drums coming in, the way it was arranged and how it came in really set the tone for the rest of that album. And I can listen to that album top to bottom, still to this day. So thinking back to that, if those 10 seconds didn't pull me into the album, I might not have listened to that album and made that connection with Linkin Park, because that was the first album that I listened to by Linkin Park. So if those 10 seconds didn't grab me, I don't know if I'd be listening to Linkin Park to this day. And Linkin Park is such a important artist for me growing up. I really connected with them through my teenage years and still listen to them to this day. So it really says a lot about how important those first 10 seconds really matter. So I want to talk a little bit about, why those 10 seconds matter and how listening habits have really changed. We have streaming platforms now versus the old CDs and vinyl. And vinyl and even CDs have made their comeback to some regard, but everyone mostly uses Spotify, Apple Music, which allows for listeners to make those quick changes in what they're listening to. It even allows them to make your own playlist of a variety of artists, right? When I was growing up listening to CDs, you really couldn't do that. You could, if you had a fancy computer, you could download your music onto the computer and make your own playlist and then burn it onto a blank CD. But that wasn't exactly cheap because you had to buy the blank CDs. You also had to have the computer capable of doing that, which back then, not many computers were capable of doing. I'm talking about 2005, 2006, around there. Technology wasn't really available to everyone. But now, with AI, the streaming platforms, the technology you have in the palm of your hand, your cell phone, you really have the ability to make your own playlist, listen to the artists you want to listen to. And it really says a lot to those first 10 seconds, because most listeners now will just listen for the first 10 seconds and decide right there and then if I'm going to like this artist. They don't bother listening to more than 10 seconds before they switch. And the reason for that is just because they can. The technology is there where they can decide instantly. And because of AI, it really caters to your listening. As I was saying, it will analyze how long does this listener listen to songs. It will analyze how long or how many skips and what songs, what genres, what artists are they skipping on. It even goes as deep as, the melodies that listeners are listening to, what really captivates them. And it curates songs that follow that same pattern. And eventually, if you skip more, it will find music and artists that you like. So eventually you will listen to songs. And then once you start to listen to those songs, it rewards you, because now it knows, okay, you like this type of music, this type of song. I can easily find music that is more catered to what you want to listen to. And I think there's some pros and cons there, right? Pros are, once it understands your listening habits, it will find songs quickly that you like, so you'll probably skip less. But what I've noticed myself listening to Spotify and using, DJX or the AI platform is I get kind of bored because it kind of boxes you in to certain artists that you're going to listen to over and over again. And in fact, I've noticed that I'll actually start to skip more. It's almost like I've gotten comfortable listening to these artists, these songs, and now I really want to listen to something new. But I'm in that place now, and, please, if you're listening to this podcast, reach out to us. Let us know, musicmusingspodcast.com, at gmail.com. And let us know, because I've certainly noticed I'm skipping more now, and I've had Spotify for a long time, because it keeps giving me the same songs, same music, same artists, and I haven't found anyone new that I like, because it just keeps repeating the same cycle of artists, same cycle of music, without giving me anything new. So, although I think the algorithms and AI will reward you when you listen to a full song, there's pros and cons there, because I think it's not gonna, it learns what you like, and then it just keeps you there. Now, some other things I've noticed to contrast streaming, and I think these are pros for vinyl, CD, and radio, if you're still listening in those formats. For example, vinyl, I do have a few vinyl albums on vinyl, and I do have a record player. And I think the biggest thing with vinyl is it's an experience that is much different than streaming. And what I say about that is, I do remember the first time I went over my friend Nathan's house. He was on our show earlier in the season, and he had a beautiful vinyl player. And I remember listening to a few albums, Fall Out Boy. We listened to some Green Day. The sound quality was so much different, right? It felt like I was there. Like the artist was in the room, they were playing in front of us, because it was so clear, it was so warm, it was a different experience. It wasn't just, I'm putting in my AirPods just to listen to some songs. You had to sit down and really listen to the music, and it was so clear that it really pulled you away and allowed you to really get deep into this album or the music that you were listening to. So I think for vinyl, at least, it's a different listening experience. You're not there to quickly skip through songs and just have music on in the background. It's putting you there to experience this album, this music, the way it was intended to be heard. And I think that's just because vinyl, the format itself, has a higher quality of audio. And that's just because the way it is recorded, it's recorded uncompressed, meaning the sound itself was not compressed during the recording process. So you're hearing everything at full quality, which is something that streaming to this day still does not do. CD is very similar. CD quality is pretty good. And I think, again, thinking about my own experience with CD growing up with it, yes, you can skip through tracks, but again, you don't know if you're really going to like this whole album until you listen to it. And you really have to sit there and listen to the album. And then even radio. I don't listen to radio anymore, but I know growing up before we had Spotify or any of the streaming services, the biggest way to hear new music was on the radio. I remember listening to Z100 or 106.1 if you were from Long Island. And you really had to have patience, because you had no control over the playlist, over what songs were being played. And I remember even, listening on my stereo system, putting a blank tape and recording the song once I heard it, because that was the way you would be able to save those songs, was on tape, and you had to record it when you heard it on the radio. So those formats, it would take more time to find the tracks or album that you truly loved, and discovering that music. But it rewarded you in the end, because, again, it took time, but you found that artist that you really enjoyed. Like I said, for me, it was Linkin Park. I think I first heard of Linkin Park on the TV, actually, watching a music video on Fuse, and just remembering, this is very different, and, going to the mall, going to FYE, and buying their album. But again, that was a process. It wasn't, one day I just heard it on Spotify and I could just immediately stream it. I had to go to a physical place to get the album, pay money, and get it. So today it's much different because I think the attention span for most listeners is shorter. And because of that instant gratification, again, the first 10 seconds of most songs, or even the first 10 seconds of the album itself, is extremely important. And artists really have to pay attention to that if they want to be successful. So let's talk now about, what actually hooks the listener in those first 10 seconds. And it's a lot of things. It's a lot of things happening. You have sound choice, which goes into the texture, the tone, the mood of the song, the rhythm, the tempo, the groove of that song, the emotion, a connection. So talking about, you don't need to understand the song yet, but you do need to, feel it. Like, what is the emotion that the artist here is trying to convey? And how familiar is this song? How familiar is this tone? How familiar is this chord progression? Is it something that you know, or is it something new that's unexpected, but relatable enough that you can immediately like it? So I'm going to talk about a couple artists here, a couple examples that do a really great job of, one does a really great job of creating songs that are just immediate hits. And they both are, actually. It's just they do it in different ways. And I think it says a lot to song complexity versus simplicity. And you can be successful in both ways. And so each of these artists approached being successful in two different ways. So the first artist I'm going to talk a little bit about is Zedd, and particularly he did a song called Clarity, which you've probably heard about because it's been played on every radio station since 2012, still gets played on the radio. He still plays the song at a lot of his festivals that he does. This song, Clarity, which came out in 2012, has gone 7 times platinum in the US and still has 2 billion streams globally. So each year, this song still gets 2 billion streams globally, which is insane. Now, I'm not much of a EDM, dance music artist. Not to say I haven't listened to a few of the artists who are out there, but when I heard this song, the song really hits all the checkboxes right away in the first 10 seconds. So if you don't mind me, I'm actually going to use my 5 Towns college degree, which is fantastic, and I'm going to nerd out a bit for the song because it is so well written, and there's so many things musically that he does in the song that deserves that analysis and respect. Zedd himself, his real name is Anton. He's a classically trained pianist himself. He knows a lot of theory. So it's great to see that in pop music. So I'm going to nerd out. And if you are listening to this podcast, I am actually going to make a video because there's a part here I really want to explain. And there's a great video I'm going to put in here that explains some of the chord patterns he does. So if you're listening to this podcast, try and watch it because there's some good information I'm going to share about this song. So first off, the song is written in the key of A flat major, which is not a commonly used key because the song has 4 flats in it. And many producers and composers tend to write songs in keys that have the least amount of flats and sharps because it makes it easier for the artists themselves to play in. But like I said, Zedd is a classically trained composer and pianist, so he isn't afraid to play in challenging keys, and I really do respect him for doing that. So when you listen to the song, the first 10 seconds, the song starts with these strings that come in on what's called a suspended chord. Now, for those of us who don't know what that is, a suspended chord is not what you would start a song with. You usually start with a chord of the key that you're playing in. So for example, if we were playing in the key of C major, I may start the song with a C major chord. It makes the most sense. Tonally, this is your home base. So this is where in that key, all the melody, all the harmony wants to start and end on in basic terms. And it's very pleasing to the ears when you're listening. So starting on a suspended chord is a very bold choice, and it's very intentional in how he did that. So shortly after the strings, we are introduced to this beautiful synth sound that is very soft and sounds like Rhodes, if you know what that is in music production, but it's a very soft, subtle sound. And the melody that he's playing on is very interesting for two reasons. So the synth is outlining what's called a B-flat 7 suspended chord, which again is not a chord you would expect to hear because it is the second chord or the second scale degree in an A-flat major key. And this immediately creates an interesting, dark, warm tone that really captivates your ear. Again, this is less than probably 3 seconds this is happening. The rhythm that he's also playing in piano is interesting because of where he places the accent on the notes. It changes from measure to measure, so it makes it really hard for you as the listener to settle into a tempo within the song. So, he's starting you off here feeling a little uncomfortable because you cannot find really the beat of this song. It's hard because of the accent, and the chords themselves, while beautiful, they are dark and a little misleading. So in this short clip that I'm going to show you, I'm going to compare two artists here. So the first clip I'm actually going to show is Taylor Swift. It's the chord progression that she uses in her song Shake It Up. So in this song, she uses 3 chords, and she does so in a very predictable pattern. She uses, now you might see in this clip, there's Roman numerals, and in music theory, we use Roman numerals to describe the chords within a chord pattern of any key. So the 1 chord that you're probably seeing that's your home base. This is the major chord of that key. This is where generally, the harmony and the melody want to start and end on. Now she uses the 2, the 4, and the 1 chord. So she's using 3 chords. In basic terms, the 4 chord usually wants to go home, being the 1 chord. And we can see that she repeats this pattern. Now, nothing against her. This works really well. Her album did phenomenal. She's made billions of dollars, so this works really well for her. And in terms of pop music, this is great. The simpler, the better. Usually. Now, we're going to compare what she did with Zedd, the song Clarity, and we're going to look at the chord pattern he chose. So Zed here is writing a bit more complex. So the pattern he used generally for this song, we can see he used 2 5 6 3 4 2 5 6 3 1. So he used like 6 chords. A little bit more complex. And again, the chords he chose are also a little bit more complex. They're not simpler chords like Taylor used. They're a little bit more like he used suspended chords. And he used what we would call chords with add-ons. So a 7th, a 9th, to add a little bit more texture, a little bit more sound. And basically, using these chords creates these big, beautiful sounds, and he's using it in a smart way. For example, instead of him playing the 5 chord, which always wants to go home, he played a 5 suspended chord, which again creates this big sound that is just what this song is known for. It has this big, ethereal kind of sound, open sound, and it's because of the suspended chord that he's using within. He also uses something that is really interesting that I haven't heard too much in pop music, and it's called a deceptive cadence. Now, without getting too deep into it, in music there's a common pattern that pop follows. Generally, music is written with chords that create tension, then the tension is resolved. So generally, music is written to resolve tension in the end. And how that is done is by creating a specific order of chords. For example, if we were in the key of C, just because it's a very simple key to write in, chord patterns want to end or resolve back to the home bass chord, which would be C. That's where you want to go back to. Now, usually you would just write a simple pattern, could be start on C major, maybe go to the 5, which would be G7, because that has that tension, and then you resolve it by going back to C. It's very simple. Zed did something different, though. He did something really smart, and instead of doing what is expected, which would be to go back to the home bass chord, which in this key would be A flat major, he used a chord that shares similar notes to A flat major within it, but not every note. So it creates this feeling of like half resolved, not being fully resolved. So the tension is not fully resolved. So it extends this feeling of being unresolved. And this isn't done in pop music that often. You know, many artists often write simple chord patterns that are pleasing to the ear and that they know are pleasing to the ear. A few artists that come to mind that also do this would be like John Mayer. He does this a lot. He'll have a deceptive cadence, or he'll have, you know, chords that have add-ons that add more texture or more bite. They're unresolved. So the way he wrote this song and using this deceptive cadence really extends this feeling of tension until you get to the end of the song where finally we have the full resolve. So, you know, with Zed, those first 10 seconds, he really crams a lot of technique, skill, composition, and ability that pull you in. But then you hear the rest of this song and what he's doing, and you really have to respect his writing. Even, like, I'm not somebody who regularly listens to EDM or dance music, and, you know, I listen to the song a lot because of his songwriting ability and his skill that he shows. So it really contrasts. You can be successful in two ways. You can be successful writing simple chord patterns like Taylor Swift did, but you can also be really creative, write really complex harmonies and melodies But if you know what you're doing in those first 10 seconds, you can still be extremely successful. So now let's go into some of the pitfalls that can happen when artists try to do too much in those first 10 seconds or don't do enough. So when an artist loses the listener early, it's usually for a few reasons. Either the buildup of that intro is taking too long. We've heard those songs that they have like a 6-minute intro and the song itself is 12 minutes long. That's too much. That's too long. And usually those songs should not be your single. That should be somewhere in the middle of the album or towards the end. Or there's no direction in where this intro is going. So usually with these songs, the intro will go into like a chorus or a strong verse. But some of these songs that have these intros that are just really long, they either die out and it doesn't, like, it has no direction or just feels unfinished. So the danger there is, these artists sometimes will overthink of these intros. They want to show off all of my music theory skill or show off my piano playing ability, and the intro ends up being like 5 minutes long. And if you want to be successful and get on the radio, like, you can do that, because the average, or not average, the typical listener, that's not going to captivate you. You have to do something that captivates the listener if you want to get mass appeal. And it also happens too where the artist is trying to sound different instead of intentional. So those first 10 seconds are really important to the rest of your song, to the rest of your album. And you really have to think about and refine it to a point where, how can I take this idea and make it as simple as possible? And a lot of really successful artists, what they'll do is they'll actually have like listening parties, or they will send their music to other producers or somebody else with a really good ear to get their opinion, and then again use that feedback to refine it again and again. So really good artists know, I need to continuously send my song out, have people I trust listen to it until I get enough feedback and enough refinement that my song now sounds ready to be published. So I can't even believe it's been 32 minutes. I'm just talking to myself here, but I'm, excited that I got to talk to you guys today a little bit about what makes the first 10 seconds really possible. I think the overall idea here is just that, the first 10 seconds don't define the whole song, but it really defines the appeal and whether the listener is actually going to listen to the rest of that song. So think about it, and this is a question I'm asking you, listeners. What song hooked you instantly? Are there songs recently that you've heard that has hooked you recently? And why? And think about, what has surprised you when you listen to these songs, about what has hooked you. So share your thoughts, your ideas with musicmusingpodcasts@gmail.com. We will see you next week. We do have a special guest coming up on our next episode. Really excited about that. And as always, follow us on Instagram @musicandmusingspodcast, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you for listening to today's podcast. If you have an idea for an intro or an outro that we could play on our show, please send to musicmusingspodcast@gmail.com.
If you have any questions, comments, or ideas, please email us at musicmusingspodcast@gmail.com.